We keep training our conscious mind through self-help books and motivational videos, but what if there's something deep down in our subconscious that keeps us from achieving those goals? How do we condition our mind from the subliminal level? Hi, this is Takatoshi Shibayama, the host of the Future Design Podcast. In this episode, we have Dr. Norman Plotkin, who's a hypnotherapist who explains to us how our subconscious mind works and how many other traumas and conditionings before we gain consciousness affects how we operate our minds today. Hypnotherapy reprograms us from our subconscious state to achieve the goals we want in our lives, from kicking addiction to improving cognitive abilities. So stick around to the end.
Future Design Podcast.
Thank you very much for being on the show, Norm. And I've been really interested about hypnotherapy and hypnosis because it really deals with our subconscious mind and how so much of it is still undiscovered. There's a lot of neuroscience behind it, but it's very difficult for general people like us to understand neuroscience. And I wanted to kind of dive a little bit in this topic with you. So my first question was, compared to the traditional therapy, psychotherapy, how is hypnotherapy different from that?
Well, many people might be surprised to know that Sigmund Freud, who started psychoanalysis, did hypnotherapy before he did psychoanalysis. The problem was the Germanic approach is fairly heavy-handed, and people would they would try and please him, and he wasn't very effective because it's that authoritarian approach made it a little clumsy. So instead, he engaged the conscious mind instead of the subconscious mind. So the difference lies in that you're speaking to the two different types of the mind. In psychoanalysis, you are going to talk to the conscious mind, and it is evolved into cognitive behavioral therapy, where you try and connect people's thoughts and their feelings and their actions through a triangle. In the subconscious mind and through hypnotherapy, it's really talking to the dream state. The subconscious mind is that part of the mind that is it's autopilot, it's programming. When you're 0 to 10 years old, you are in hypnosis, and you mirror and match and pace and lead the people in your sphere of influence, and you just sponge the stuff up, and it becomes your programming. And you don't really think about it, but think about some of the things you heard as a child. Money doesn't grow on trees. Why can't you be more like your brother? These things become locked into our subconscious mind as our programming and will affect us for the rest of our lives. So the difference is kind of a conscious approach versus an unconscious approach. And, the theory of mind that we operate under, where I was trained, is that basis of 0 to 8 years old, you are programming in hypnosis. And then about 8, 9, 10 years old, the critical mind forms over the subconscious mind. The subconscious mind is collecting experiences. I love my mom, I love chocolate cake, I like birthday parties, I don't like spankings or broccoli, or, you know what I mean? So these are just pluses and minuses, and they become our knowns. The subconscious mind loves the known, hates the unknown, and will do anything to escape the unknown at times. So 10 years old, that critical mind forms over the subconscious mind, and the conscious mind begins to develop about the same time that our personality does. And it's marked by analysis, reason, logic, decision-making, and willpower. Problem is, you've seen the graphic of the iceberg, right? Where the subconscious mind is this big leviathan underneath the surface, and the conscious mind is just the tip. And so we think that logic and reason and analysis are in control, but in reality, our 5 senses bring information in, our conscious mind organizes it and compares it to our programming. If it doesn't comport with our programming, the conscious mind will come up with a rationalization. For example, you're not born loving cigarettes. Somewhere along the line, your programming made that okay. And you can pick up a box of cigarettes, and on the side it says, the Surgeon General warning, this will cause you to die. And you read it and you say, well, it won't happen to me, or I'll be old by the time that happens. Or you see that we begin to rationalize. And that's the conscious mind making a rationalization based on our subconscious programming. So now, does psychoanalysis speak to the subconscious mind? I'm sure it does. It's more subtle, but hypnotherapy goes right to the subconscious mind with imagery and the stuff of dream state, right? So um, hypnosis and trance is much like the dream state. Hypnosis is Greek for sleep, and it's like sleep. People often report that they feel like they've had a 3-hour nap after a 30-minute session of hypnosis. And it's like sleep, and it triggers. I've gotten someone in through an induction. Their eyes are likely to be in REM, rapid eye movement. Their cheeks flatten out. They'll experience arm catalepsy, just like when you're dreaming. When you're dreaming, your body, your arms and legs go numb, so that you don't. When you're fighting that dragon in the dream, you don't impale yourself or someone else, right? So the same thing in hypnosis, your arms and legs are likely to go into catalepsy. And so you're very still, you're very quiet, you're in a REM-like response. And that's when in hypnotherapy, we use imagery and metaphors. So it's oblique, and we draw pictures, and we engage all of the senses, and which is a little different than the literal psychoanalysis. So it's a lot of fun.
Yeah. Before we dive into how we get into this hypnosis state, I wanted to talk a little bit more about the subconscious part that you were talking about in the beginning, that when you're a child up until 8 or 10, you develop this kind of, you're in a hypnosis state where you're developing your subconscious. And as we grow older, our consciousness kicks in, and then we develop this 2 layers of our mind, the conscious and then the subconscious. But as we still continue to grow older, and you mentioned about cigarettes, I mean, obviously when you're probably until 10 years old, you're not thinking about cigarettes too much. Maybe if your father or parents are smoking, might think about it, but you don't think it's okay to smoke. So I think at some state, as you're still growing older, your subconscious is still absorbing a lot of things as they grow older. So, what are a lot of the things that can affect our subconscious even as an adult?
Peer pressure, our inner desires. We can overcome our programming. Oftentimes, it's difficult, and it's set. It's going to be very difficult. Unless the mind finds a way to comport with that earlier programming. So if you desire something, oftentimes you can overcome a predisposition against it. But behavior is very difficult to change. If you listen to Dr. Joe Dispenza, he'll tell you that we have 60 to 70,000 thoughts every day, and 90% of them are the same as they were yesterday. And so usually, in order to make change, it requires a breakup or an illness or a job loss. Otherwise, we're in this well-defined route and so the same part of the brain, the subconscious mind, also runs our physiology. All right. So the part of our brain that keeps us 98.6 and our resting heart rate and these involuntary physiological conditions, it's the same subconscious mind that controls behavior. So for example, if you have an experience and you come up with a behavior as a defense mechanism against that experience, the experience may be long gone, but the behavior lingers because the subconscious mind is afraid that it might encounter that painful emotional trauma, right? So if I ask you, why do you do that? And you say, well, 20 years ago, this happened to me. And memory is completely unreliable. You don't remember the facts. In fact, you'll recount it wrong every time. What you remember is how it made you feel. So when you experience something, you have a neurochemical response that creates a feeling, that creates an emotion, and that emotion is imprinted in your body. So that experience that you think you remember, you only remember how it made you feel. So now you're living a predictable future, because I can predict it because this happened to you 20 years ago. and you operate this way. So now I can predict how you're going to act. You're living a predictable future based on an unreliable past that's robbing you of your present precious moment. And so these things are very difficult. So to your question, yes, you can change around subtle edges, concerted effort. But if there's some kind of emotional underpinning to, or a dramatic experience in that first 10 years, and your programming is super solid, it's going to be really difficult to get around it. So, you can change, you can adapt, and you can grow. The notion of neuroplasticity, as we can continue, used to be thought that you had X number of brain cells and that's it. You could kill some, but you can't grow anymore. But we understand differently now that you can create new neural pathways, and we can adapt and change. But change is difficult for the reasons I just suggested.
Mm. And I've learned that when you memorize something, as you said, a lot of the details that we remember is very, very much dissipates when it goes into the subconscious mind, because it's not that important, right? If we remember every single detail that our eyes actually sees, you can't really probably contain that in our mind. So we just remember the essence of it, and the other parts that we forget, we probably make up as we go, and it's such a very fragile state. So I guess when you're in the hypnosis state, already that softened memory is easier to manipulate, I guess. Maybe that's not the right word to say, but easy to control, and then we can change the outcome of that feeling. Is that how it works?
Yeah, reframing is a critical component to what I do. I always ask people, are you ready to change? Are you ready to write a new story? Because that's the most difficult part. That's the thing that you have to acknowledge right now that I'm ready for a new story, because we cling to our stories. We hold on to them. It's our identity. I mean, we all know people who jump on Facebook and write about their colitis or whatever their ailment is. And there's a thing called secondary gain that they get. Right? By sharing, they get empathy, sympathy, they get attention, and it's really difficult to give that up if you're getting something from it, right? So I ask them, are you ready to write a new story? And then I begin helping them reframe. Also, one of the tenets I operate under is, before you try and help someone heal, make sure they're done with the behavior that got them into the mess in the first place, right? It's a hard concept to communicate, and you have to be delicate about it, because you don't want to offend people. Most people, they will resist if you tell them, if you just came straight out and directly said, you've made this up because you're getting something out of it. Well, they'll resist, and that's no way to make progress. So you have to lead them to that conclusion and allow them to see how holding on to their story keeps them stuck, and how writing a new story. So I always engage people in the new story. Give me details, elements. Who's in it? What are you doing? What are the things you're going to do? How will you feel? How will you feel? Where will you feel that in your body? So I engage them in the reframe, and to get them to feel in their body this changed story. The fact is, most people come to see me for something that isn't what's wrong. Mm-hmm. They come in with something that they're sick of doing, but it's almost universally something else, usually from childhood, and it's the behavior that or the event, circumstances that gave rise to the behavior is gone, but the behavior persists because you're afraid to get rid of it, or you don't know how, or you're not aware of it, right? So a lot of it is in accepting. I reflective listen. So I ask questions, and then I ask again. I restate it to them so they can hear me saying what they just said to me, because oftentimes they'll say something and it doesn't even register what they just said because they're so familiar with it, right? So, so I reflective listen, and then I give it back to them, and then we begin to reframe and kind of change. And we do that in the cognitive part. And then in the hypnosis, once I take them in, then I give it back to them in their words with images and colors and the things that they're going to enjoy.
A lot of the memories that we have, I mean, especially for me, I can remember certain fragments of memories when I was, let's say, 5 or 6, but it only starts to come a little bit more vivid maybe after 8, 9, 10. A lot of the stuff that I feel like I've stored, and as you said, in that time when from 0 to 10 is probably quite lost in my conscious memory. But you're saying that all that detail is still kind of stored in our subconscious that we're not really aware of. And how do you actually get that out of them? So let's go into the process where you take them into this trance state, which I don't even know what that means. If you could tell me a little bit more about that. I mean, I practice meditation, and when I do meditation, I guess it's sort of like going into a light sleep mode right before going into the REM state, where I feel somewhat conscious but somewhat unconscious as well. But what you're trying to do is going even deeper to that, because you mentioned you know the people are already in the REM state while still being aware of their consciousness.
All right. So here's a couple of definitions. Hypnosis is a state of inner absorption, concentration, and focused attention. It's like using a magnifying glass to focus the rays of the sun and make them more powerful. Similarly, when our minds are concentrated and focused, we are able to use them more powerfully. Because hypnosis allows people to use more of their potential, learning self hypnosis is the ultimate act of self control. That's from the American Psychology Association.
Mm-hmm.
Then hypnosis or trance is an animated, altered, integrated state of focused consciousness, i.e., controlled imagination. It's an attentive, receptive state of concentration that can be activated readily and measured. It requires some degree of dissociation to enter and become involved in imagined activity, enough concentration for an individual to maintain a certain level of absorption and some degree of suggestibility to take in new ideas. That's from Dr. David Spiegel at Stanford, where there's a lot of great research going on.
Mm-hmm.
And he gets into brain, they're measuring stuff. They can tell you about all of the pathways in the brain that are affected by hypnosis now. That it's some powerful stuff if you want to do follow-up in terms of the physiology. So let's talk about hypnosis. Means sleep in Greek, but it's not sleep. There's a great project in the UK called Human Gibbons Project, and they have the theory that when you're in vitro, when you're in the womb, you're in REM the whole time, and you're getting a download from your mother and from what Dr. Jung called the collective consciousness. So we're getting some human download, some mom download, and we're in REM, and each night, during sleep, the subconscious mind is triggered, all right? So you remember everything. Your subconscious mind, everything that your five senses bring in, and it's overwhelming. The conscious mind acts as a filter. We would be overwhelmed. And so at night when we dream, we vent. We let go of this multitude of information and details that no longer serve us. We retain what we need, and we vent huge amounts. I mean, right down to the license plate on the car that just drove by, believe it or not. But because memory is unreliable, it's not admissible in court and this type of thing. But we have this vast amount of information that we bring in. So we vent it, we let go of it, and we keep only what we need.
Mm-hmm.
So when athletes or top performers or musicians, the subconscious mind, they practice. You mentioned practice, memorization. And they get to the point where the conscious mind doesn't have to think about it anymore. It's called the zone. Being in the zone. Ask any athlete or musician when they have that's subconscious, that's accessing parts of the subconscious mind that are tantamount to flow. Now you can reach flow in meditation. Hypnosis is akin to meditation, but it's a meditative state. Trance, meditation, depending on the level of meditation that you're able to achieve. I mean, some would argue that Tibetan monks who can lower their body temperature or slow their breath to almost nothing. Some would say that that's self-hypnosis. So depending on your degree and mastery of meditation, it's very similar. it's hypnosis. Everyone goes into it. So if you're driving home from work and you pull into your driveway and you don't remember the drive home, you were in hypnosis. Or that twilight, your eyes are fluttering right before you fall asleep. Good idea to have a notebook by the side of your bed and write down 3 goals right before you fall asleep. Give it to your subconscious mind. Or if you're watching a movie, an action flick, and you just like, you feel like you're in it. That's hypnosis. Oftentimes, in hypnosis, I will have them picture a screen and a movie going on and see themselves in the movie. So that's kind of some background. I mean, there's a lot more. It used to be that all we could share was anecdote, and so the medical community would say, well, it's more on the force of the personality of the hypnotist or hypnotherapist than measurable results from the person. But now we can measure it, and they're learning what's going on. So it's real, and that's the great part about today. But let me give you an example. So in a typical hour session, the first 30 minutes, I'm going to do a cognitive interview about what the problem is in their own words, what their desired outcome is going to be. And I'm writing notes, and I'm listening for effective words that they use that are important to them to describe how they feel, where they feel in their body. They don't know it, but I'm hypnotizing them then, right? Mm-hmm. So I'm overloading them with message units, and I'm gaining valuable information and taking copious notes to come back. And then they're in kind of, I give them my pre-hypnotic speech, similar to that theory of mind that I gave you, 0 to 10, and so on and so forth. And then I move them to the chair and they recline, take them through a progressive relaxation, or maybe they've been there a few times and that bores them. So maybe I have another induction. I can do a rapid induction or something to mix it up. But anyway, I have lots of ways in. Mm-hmm. And what I'm going for is to overload them with a lot of message units, a lot of information, and there'll be a moment where the relaxation and the concentration cross over, and they want to escape me, right? And that triggers fight or flight, and I see it, like the breathing changes, their cheeks flatten out, and their eyes will go into REM. Sometimes I'll roll their eyes, have them with their eyelids closed, roll their eyes up to the top of their head. I got a lot of different tactics. But in that moment, I'm sitting right next to them, and I got a little music, a little hypnotic music going on. I'm talking low, I'm stretching out my words. The clock I bought specifically because it talks really loud on the wall. You know what I mean? So all of these things, and so there's that moment that they try and escape, and they drop into fight or flight, and that's when then I'll take them down a 10-step staircase and deepen them with each step, or I'll take them on a canoe ride where they paddle, and then they bring the paddle in and they float and drift, and that deepens the state. There are 3 states of hypnosis. Hypnoidal is that drive home that you don't remember, but you were conscious because you were driving, but you were in hypnosis. That's hypnoidal. It's a light state. Then there's catalepsy. That's when your arms and legs will go to sleep, and you will trigger REM. And then there's somnambulism, which is the deepest state. And those who go into somnambulism, they'll hear everything and they'll process everything, but they're likely to have amnesia and they won't remember. Some people walk around in somnambulism all the time. You might think of them as gullible, or they just are highly suggestible. And so anyway, I work in catalepsy, so it's that middle state of catalepsy that I'm aiming for. And once I have them there and the physiological signs are present and I recognize them, then I begin to give them a series of suggestions, and I build images based on the things that they've told me. And I incorporate as many details that they've shared with me. And what is it they want to accomplish? What's their desired outcome? Who's going to be somebody going to be proud of you? See the smile on someone's face that when they see that you've quit smoking. You know what I mean? Or you know what I mean? So I engage them. If I just read something or talked from the top of my head, it wouldn't be as effective as when I give them back the very things that they've told me. So I'm a very, very detailed note taker, right? So that's a typical session. We'll, depending on what's going on, there's a lot of people who show up. A lot of people are triggered right now in this current environment. They're triggered over childhood traumas because they're afraid. They're afraid of pandemics. They're afraid of lockdowns. They've been triggered, traumas, long dormant traumas. So people are coming in and for things that they think it's bothering them, and it's something altogether different. So I help them relax. What I usually do, the first session, if they've never been hypnotized, I introduce them and I lay out a plan in hypnosis. And then the second one, we visit that inner child. We go back and love on that inner child that we all have, and help them with any unresolved issues. And then the next session is like a reframe, like the Garden of Life. I'll take them in, and there's all these dead leaves that represent people and things that hurt them or no longer serve them. I have them rake them up into a big pile and then light it on fire, and then plant some new seeds, and then visualize the new fruit being born on the trees. And that new fruit, they've articulated, these are the things that then I give back to them. So it's kind of a progression.
Yeah, that's very interesting. So basically, you're not actually revisiting their past memories and changing that memory. You're actually inputting a different layer on top of it that relieves them with that kind of behavioral aspects or feelings that they felt during that time of their childhood or that traumatic incident.
Mostly, yes. I mean, there are times when people have had cumulative trauma, and so if we're dealing with trauma, there's a thing called circle therapy. You bring it up. You can't be anxious and relaxed at the same time. It's a law. It's one of the laws that we operate under. So when they're deeply relaxed, I bring the trauma up, let them see that it can't hurt them, let it go, bring it up. But for the most part, we write a new story. In fact, like I've helped people with migraines or stuttering or social anxiety, and I say, did you learn anything from this? What did you get out of this? You've been dealing with this 6 years. Did you learn anything? Can you find a way to be grateful? And oftentimes we'll say, yeah, I learned sympathy for others, or I learned, or they rattle off something that they learned and they've never thought of it as a gift. They've thought of it as a curse. So you change the dynamic, you change how they feel about it, and then you ask them to give it gratitude. Be grateful. So these things that you learn about yourself and about others that you grew, be grateful and thank it, and let it know that you don't need it any longer. And now we're going to go paint this new story. And it's a sea change. You know what I mean? They've never considered it in that way.
I see. What about like patients with like PTSD, where they were in war and then they had this traumatic event? I mean, how do you actually get them out of that traumatic event? Because I'm sure that it's a different way to look at that event, right? I mean, it's hard to bring out a positive out of those events.
There's a way. There's always a way to frame it and cast it so that there's something that they learned from it. Maybe it saved their life one time. So I mentioned circle therapy, where when you're relaxed, you can't be anxious, so you bring it up and you let them. Also teaching mindfulness. Oftentimes with people who trauma, I have them, contemplate their coffee or tea cup and just look at it, and the texture and the color and the warmth, and just be completely in that moment. You see, because they become hypervigilant and they're ready for the next shoe to drop. So they can be OCD. Now they're obsessive compulsive, worrying about whether the door is locked, or they become depressed about how they can't get out of it. So depression is living in the past. Anxiety is living in the future. So bringing them to the precious present moment, reframing it, and allowing them to see that it cannot no longer hurt them. You see, because they're holding on to the behavior because the subconscious mind is afraid. I had a client who had fibromyalgia for 9 years, and all the doctors could do was give her pain pills. And she took the pain pills for 8 years, depression, side effects, and they stopped working, had to eat more and more of them all the time. And she finally kicked them she tried everything. Many people come to me, they've tried everything else. So she comes to me and she's tried everything else. And so I did the typical stuff. She had a lot of trauma. She grew up on the wrong side of the tracks, single mom, but she pulled herself out of that and went in the Air Force, went to college, had a great job working in the state legislature. And so we did some work around the inner child and writing a new story, but it was lingering. And so I said, like the fourth session, I'm like, what was going on in your life when this started? She said, no one's ever asked me that. I'm like, well, let's look at it. What was going on? She went through a terrible divorce. And there were child custody, and it was ugly, and it was emotional. And this is a person, kicks butt in a man's world, she was an Air Force veteran, very strong, but deep down emotionally, she was a marshmallow. And she was afraid of that emotional pain. And even though the divorce was over, she had a working relationship with the ex, they have a kid together, but she was so afraid of feeling that emotional pain, she somatized it into her body. There's a good book called The Body Keeps the Score. And we'll go into somatic response in a minute. But she somatized that emotional pain into her body and became a collection of autoimmune symptoms. The doctors just said, okay, you got symptom. Well, this is a bucket of autoimmune. All we can do is control the pain. And instead, I said, are you ready to let this go? She said, well, if I could have let this go, I'd have done it years ago. I'm like, okay. If you could, are you ready? She said, yes. So you see, I got buy-in. I'm getting them in, got her into that yes set. Yes, I'm ready. So I did an arm raising. I had her, put all of her pain, all of her stuff in her arm and let it go. Right. So I preconditioned her to an arm raising when she's in hypnosis. And then I deepened her again. And then I told her that when she was ready to let go of this, because it no longer serves her and there's nothing to be afraid of, when she's ready to let it go and ready to live the life and I read back to her all the things that she said she was going to do, then your arm is going to begin to lift and rise. And nothing happened. And if I was a brand new hypnotherapist, I'd have been mortified. But I'm experienced, so I sat, and she doesn't know because there's time distortion, right? It's only me that it seems like it's forever. For her, she's lost in time distortion hypnosis, right? So nothing happens. I wait a little while, and I say it again. When you're ready to let this go, your arm will begin to lift and rise. Nothing happens, and all of a sudden, lifting, rising, jerking, and so she's got her arm straight out, sticking straight out. I said, excellent. Now you're going to go do all these things. And I gave her again, in great detail. You're going to travel. You're going to start boxing again and martial arts. And you're going to go out 3 nights a week. And the girlfriends you haven't seen in years, and all these in the colors and how's it going to feel in your body? And I read it all back to her. And a smile came on her face. And then I bring her back out of hypnosis. And the first thing her conscious mind sees is her arm sticking straight out in front of her. So she knows, her conscious mind knows that her subconscious mind said she's ready to get rid of it because here's the proof. Her arm was still sticking up. So I usually go every week. I let her go 2 weeks, and then I emailed her, you ready for another session? She said, yes. I held my breath. I said, what would you like to work on? And she said, motivation instead of pain, right? So she said, I've been depressed for so long, I can't get my butt out of bed. I need help with motivation and everything. And so I was super excited because now we're past the pain and we moved into motivation. And now she's got her life back. I see her on social media. It's like she's on fire and it's done. But you see that, so that trauma, remember when we said you don't remember the details, you remember how it made you feel. Yeah. So that experience created neurochemistry, which created a feeling, which created an emotion and was stored in your body. And we're a collection of those stored. So oftentimes trauma, we have to release these repressed emotions, release them, let them go.
Right. And I find that a lot of, there's a lot of self-help meditation guides for hypnotherapy on YouTube and all these places. And I find that, I personally like the personal touch instead of actually trying to do it on YouTube because I don't really understand what it does to me. What is your opinion on trying to use these methods that you see online versus what you do for your patients?
There's three things needed for a hypnotic modality: authority, a doctrine or a paradigm, and you have to feel something. All right. So I'm certified clinical hypnotherapist, and I have diplomas on my wall. That's my authority. The doctrine or paradigm is the theory of mind that I shared with you before, my pre-induction speech. I share them, and you got to feel something. So when they go in, they feel very relaxed. They might float and drift, and they know they've felt something. All right. So let's look at a couple of other things in society. A white lab coat and stethoscope. Medical books. Do you feel something when you go to the doctor? You know, that white coat syndrome, not a good place to have your blood pressure taken, right? So that's a hypnotic modality. How about this one? The white collar, the good book, people sing in church. That's hypnotic. That's hypnotic. So I use YouTube videos for meditation. I have binaural beats on the Schumann resonance. So that I can get in tune and resonate with the Earth's frequency. There's the solfeggio frequencies. There's all kinds of great stuff for meditation, and I use it. Sometimes one of my favorites is Native American flute and drums and a crackling fire. This is somewhat hypnotic, but in terms of a specific YouTube video to try and stop smoking, your conscious mind will reject it. It's not going to trigger. You'll get deeply relaxed, but you don't know when the moment is, or if you even drop in. One of the biggest things, I watch people resist me. You know, people say, "I don't think I can be hypnotized." I'm like, "Do you want to be?" You know, Dr. David Spiegel, I told you at Stanford, in his research, he says 75 to 80% of people can be, and there's 20 to 25% who can't. And that's only because they won't relinquish control. So he's the doctor. He's doing amazing studies. Who am I to question him? I just tell you that in my experience, if people want to be hypnotized, they can be. But people come and they pay me money and they resist me. And I watch and I just smile because, once you reach a certain level of mastery, I can see the resistance. They'll turn their head. There's all kinds of little cues that I get, and then I got to work around, and so it's kind of fun for me to get past their defenses. But if no one's minding the store, so to speak, if you're alone with your earbuds and you're trying to do self-hypnosis and your conscious mind is you don't even know you're resisting. You know what I mean? You're not even conscious of your own resistance, right? So there are people who it might work for, but very few. And it's because it lacks the authority. It's unclear about the doctrine or the paradigm. You may or may not feel something. So that's the difference. And trust me, I'm a little biased because I invested a good amount of time in my training. I went to the only nationally accredited school of hypnotherapy in America. But there are people who can go to a weekend seminar or a week-long seminar and become a certified hypnotist. And, just make sure that who you're dealing with has ample training. It's very different. A stage hypnotist who can get you to cluck like a chicken is very different. You don't want to bring your trauma to them. You know what I mean? It's, there's a lot of stuff they'll miss. And one of the challenging things, and just speaking to you as a businessman, is in my journey, I've been on a 7-year spiritual awakening. I came out of a 25-year career in politics, and I walked away from all of that, and I came to this spiritual awakening, and I've extinguished most of my ego. But where my ego persists is I want to help people in as few sessions as possible. Not a good business model, right? But people come to me and they say, I've been in therapy for 9 years. Like, didn't in year 3 you wonder if this was going to work for you? You know what I mean? So I most of the time, 3, 6, 9, 12 sessions, depending on how long they've been dealing with what they're dealing with. I like to get them help and send them on their way. Now, they may come back with a different issue later because they trust you, but I'm not going to keep you in therapy for longer than you need to, because there's that little bit of ego that makes, I want to help you.
Mm. And how did you get into this? So you mentioned that you were in politics before, and you spent many years learning your craft. What led you down to this path?
Well, I had no idea that I was practicing conversational hypnosis when I was a lobbyist. It wasn't until later when I learned about it. I grew up on a ranch in a rural tradition with storytelling, these colorful character cowboys that told stories. And so I learned storytelling, and that made me a good lobbyist. I didn't realize that there's an element of storytelling to conversational hypnosis. And the longer and more winding the story is, that people want to escape. They're like, you got a point in there somewhere? I'm like, yeah, I'm getting to it. Just a minute. So the trigger for me was I got sick. I loved public policy. I loved persuasion. I was in speech and debate in college and student government, but it's a toxic. It's money and politics. It's ugly, and I didn't like that. I love to play the game. I love to create an argument. I love the highfalutin nature of public policy, but deep down, it wasn't my soul's purpose, and I got sick. I had cancer, and cancer in and of itself is a journey, and I came to understand that it's a signal that we need to pay attention. Illness of any kind, especially cancer, is a signal. And if we don't hear the signal, we won't fare well. And so I struggled. It returned. I had 2 rounds of radiation, a radical thyroidectomy, lymph node dissection, 2nd round of radiation. And that's when I made changes in my life. And I began to meditate, and I radically changed my diet. I deepened my spirituality. I released repressed emotions. I took charge of my healthcare, and I came up with a reason to live. And I got into communion with my subconscious mind. So those 7 steps, they're not groundbreaking, and I didn't make them up, but I found my way to them, and I wrote a book called Take Charge of Your Cancer. And what I did was I shared the 7 things that I did that give you something that empowers you. You see, go where you're told, get a second opinion, take the pill. These are disempowering statements and actions. Empowering is, what can I do? I can meditate. I can still my active mind. I can change my diet and think about what I'm consuming. The things that, so I give people just my experience on what, and one of those is commune with the subconscious mind. And so the power of the mind helped me get past this. I heard the message of cancer, and I changed my life. And I went into personal study to find out what exactly is my soul's purpose. You can read Eckhart Tolle, Awakening to Your Soul's Purpose, and still not figure it out. It takes work, it takes some work to figure out what it is. And so meditation, deep meditation. And so the universe, I began to meditate. I was doing japa meditation one day, and I got a download. I've experienced all of the clairs, Claire Augustus, Claire Audience, Claire Avoyance. I've experienced all of these as I've opened my mind, and I've opened to meditation, and I've, connecting with the divine. You can pray when you talk to the divine. Meditation is when you listen for answers. And if you're quiet and still, you can get downloads. And so all of these things led me, and I had moved from Sacramento to LA, and I found this college of hypnotherapy, and I went in, and I knew through a friend, someone had gone there. We had dinner and talked about it, and I had never been hypnotized formally, and I went and I signed up, and I never looked back, and I enjoyed it thoroughly, and I learned it, and it helped me get my first book written, and now the second book is all of what I've learned and how I've taken what I've learned and put it into the service of others. And that was really the key. There was a book called The Power of Intention by Wayne Dyer. And when you put yourself into the service of others, you don't have to worry about your own care. Money, everything that you need will come when you're not focused on, I was very ambitious, and all of those material things meant a lot to me, I thought, until I got sick. And then they really didn't matter. And what mattered was being a good human and helping other humans. And when that became my focus, the universe began to take care of me.
Fascinating story. Fascinating. Well, those was very interesting insights, and I think I learned a lot more about hypnotherapy, and it triggers a lot more of my interest in trying it out for myself. So, where can people find you if they want to reach out to you? Because I know you do like online sessions for hypnotherapy as well. Could you give us where people
Sure.
can find you?
Yeah, of course. And Zoom is getting more popular than ever, but I've done hypnotherapy with people all over the world, Australia, New Zealand, Canada, England. My website is normanplotkin.com, NORMANPLOTKIN.com. And it has links to everything. Linktree has links to my offerings. My second book is out now, Mastermind, Master Life. You can look for that hashtag. I'm on LinkedIn on the professional side, LinkedIn, Norman Plotkin, and Facebook, Norman Plotkin, Inc., INC. And so, yeah, I do hypnotherapy with folks all over the world. And Zoom is a fantastic platform. And, you know, everyone can benefit from hypnotherapy. Everyone really can.
Hi, this is your host Takatoshi Shibayama. Thank you for listening all the way to the end. Now, if you enjoyed or disliked the show, please let me know by writing in the comment section. The only way I can improve or add value to you is through your voices. If there are any topics that you would like me to pick up, please also let me know in the comments. I'd love to start chatting with you all. And if you would like to continue watching the show, please subscribe. Thank you.